What do you do when you come from a low-income family with limited educational resources, yet you aspire to achieve great things? On this episode of Life Jacks, the Resilience Podcast, I have the esteemed pleasure of speaking with Dr. David Schein, a true embodiment of resilience and determination. As the oldest of 7 children, Dr. Schein navigated the challenges of his upbringing to secure an Ivy League scholarship and ultimately earned multiple advanced degrees, including an MBA, JD, and PhD. His journey is not just a tale of personal triumph, but also a reflection of the importance of discipline, focus, and an unwavering commitment to ethical success. Dr. Schein, nicknamed the Employment Guru, is currently a professor at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. And he is known for being able to answer just about any employment-related question one could imagine. Join me as Dr. Schein shares his inspiring story and insights on leadership, workplace ethics, and the critical role of resilience in achieving professional goals.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
Hi, Dr. Schein. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
I am doing great, and I want to just say right up front, thank you so much for the invitation, and it's been delightful to connect with you.
No, most definitely, especially since you're a Houstonian, and of course, I live in the Houston area too, so anytime I run across a person such as yourself that definitely embodies resilience, I definitely want to, make sure that you are on my show because I do have a large following from the Houston area.
Yes, well, that's great, and of course, Houston sometimes is called the world's biggest small town.
No, absolutely, and yes, as we were discussing earlier in the pre-interview, it seems like people are moving here by the minute.
and we welcome, we're pretty friendly people here, and I'm not originally from Houston. I got here as quick as I could.
That makes 2 of us, because I'm actually from Austin, Texas.
All right.
What motivated you to pursue higher education despite the challenges that you faced?
Well, it was a difficult start. My parents did not have a lot. My dad was a career enlisted man in the Navy, and that is a very low income position. And we did not live originally on the naval base. And for a lot of long-term enlisted military, part of the way of surviving financially is to actually live in government housing. And so my mom had a GED. My dad did finish high school, had taken a couple college courses, and decided it wasn't for him. But my parents were very unusual in that from a very early age, my parents just kept saying, "You're going to go to college. You're going to go to college. You're going to go to college." And that in itself was a driver, but it really kind of kicked in about 7th or 8th grade. And for me, a separate incident happened. I had some emotional issues as a youngster, like 7 or 8 years old. And I saw a pediatric psychiatrist through the U.S. Navy, through the Naval Hospital, and was very inspired. And so I had 2 goals. One is from my parents wanting to finish college. The other one is I actually went to college to become a medical doctor, and that did not work out in droves. So, and that's kind of a story that I'm working on right now, trying to explain to people in writing what happened. But it was pretty crazy. And of course, with 7 kids, and I was very, very focused in high school and was a top performing student and was rewarded with a scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I had never been on the campus until the day I reported for classes.
Wow. And so, since you did not come from a family who had degrees, right? So you're a first generation college graduate. What do you think attributed to your success to want to even achieve higher degrees, right? So you didn't just get a bachelor's, like you pushed forward to master's and then at the doctorate level.
Well, when I started in college, what happens is, of course, scholarship only covers tuition and fees. So I had a federal loan, and I also had to work. And they actually had me working for a medical doctor as my work study job. And that convinced me that I really didn't want to be a doctor. But then I had this issue. Well, what will I do? I've been committed for 15 years to be a doctor. What happens now? And so I began to be involved in business. And did some analysis at the career training center there. And they said, gee, you're really cut out to be a lawyer. And I ended up having my own business. And so as I progressed through undergraduate school, I decided that I needed an MBA and a law degree because I wanted to be a real big corporate leader of business. And the very competitive MBA program at the University of Virginia Darden School accepted me. I was only one of 3 students in that class who came direct from college. But the reason they did it is because they were fascinated by the fact that this kid, scholarship kid, starts a business and manages to keep all his bills paid for 3.5 years while he's in college. And so that's how I ended up on the business track and getting the MBA and then the law degree.
Wow. You've worked with various Fortune 50 companies as well as taught at prestigious universities. So how do you think that those experiences shape your approach to leadership?
Well, Shell Oil was I worked for Gulf Oil in law school, and Gulf, of course, is still a branded name, but it's no longer an oil company. And I realized that they weren't the best run oil company in the country or in the United States. And then Shell really taught me a great deal. They were, when I worked for them, and many people I still know who, frankly, have retired from Shell at this point, is Shell was a first-class operation. So I got a chance to see how things are done right. And then I went to a mid-size oil company, which was owned by a huge conglomerate, and that was Tenneco Oil Company. And as Houstonian, you may remember that the marathon in Houston used to be the Tenneco Houston Marathon. And
yes.
I was at Tenneco at that time. I actually ran the marathon in 1986. And so Tenneco melted down while I was there. And so it influences me as a business professor because I've seen Shell Oil do it well and Tenneco fail, a gigantic corporation. The whole corporation failed. And so it gave me 2 different sides of the coin, and it enables me to say, whatever you do in life, you need to do it the right way. You need to go in there with enthusiasm. You need to have a good business plan if you're in business, and you've got to put your heart into it. And it's very important. And of course, we've seen, horrible meltdowns. Like Tenneco was not an ethical meltdown. It was just a business failure. But of course, then, 20 years later, we saw Enron right here in Houston self-destruct, and that was an ethical failure. And that's one of the key cases that we talk a lot about when I teach business ethics.
Well, everything, of course, evolves over the years and over decades. And I can definitely attest that leadership is one of those things that has evolved. I'm thinking partially because now with each generation, we kind of have to handle each generation differently. And so For this latest generation, I believe, now we are the Gen Xers and the millennials are giving birth to, I guess, Gen Alpha is what they're calling them. But what do you think are the key qualities that define effective leadership in today's modern age that is totally different from when you first started out in leadership?
Well, one of the basics is still hard work and an ethical approach to everything. I think a more accepting concept of diversity is part of the reality of modern leadership, is that this is not the white shirt and narrow ties of the IBM generation of the big blue, and it's just a very different environment. But I think one of the things that's been undersold is I actually had an MBA student write in an essay. I'm going to just work 9 to 5. I refuse to compromise my life and all that. And I just thought it was kind of humorous because, in my first job at Shell Oil, I worked 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and was hopeful if they didn't need me on Saturday. But I was promoted 3 times in 3 years. And it's like, and that's one of the concerns I have is that we have much higher absenteeism, much higher, people sitting on their phones and distracted and not committing to their position. And yet they expect to be treated, the same as the A team. And, my personal reference to myself is you're dealing with an A team person. And I'm sorry, but if you want to be in the A team, you've got to make that commitment. And, that includes getting a good education and not just getting through school, but actually learning the material. That doesn't mean all straight A's. It means really learning the material and putting in some hard work. But I think the leaders today need to be more tuned in to the individuals that they work with than perhaps any time in the past.
No, for sure. I can definitely tell you as a leader myself in my job, and it is definitely, you do have to have resilience for sure, because it can be frustrating, I guess is the word I want to use. I don't know if that's the most correct word, because this generation of workers is very different than when I started out working. And I very much so in the field of education, I got to work really early or I stayed really late trying to grade papers and get lesson plans done and all talking to parents. And now you just can't find many people who will stay late like that unless it's a part of their job, like they have to cover the basketball game or so there's a parent night. You just can't find that. So do you think that that's a good thing, or is that this next generation of workers has a better grasp of work-life balance, or what do you think it is?
Well, given how hard I've worked in my life, and I'm still working very hard. I'm in the office today, as I do 7 days a week, and I don't think that there's a understanding that if you want to compete with the A performers, you need to put in the A performer work. And this is one of my concerns about some of what we're hearing in the current generation is that they want to kind of have their personal style of life, but they don't understand that there are people out there who are out there really putting it in for the business or for their own family, or, writing 6 books instead of 1 book. I mean, there's all sorts of different examples. And so I do get a little frustrated by that. I can tell you that I teach in class and online, and I'm concerned because a lot of students are opting for online because they see it as easier. And certainly if you're commuting in the greater Houston area, commuting is no fun. But there's much more impact educationally in the classroom. But one of the things that I run into is increasingly poor attendance in the classroom, even if the student has selected an in-person class. And like I said, the number one concern I'm hearing from employers today is that the new generation, the current generation, does not show up for work. And when they do show up, they're not dedicated to getting the job done. Turnover is much higher today in many businesses. So I do get concerned that we somehow haven't gotten the message out that life does involve a lot of work.
No, most definitely. And now you often speak about the importance of having an ethical workplace. So in your vision of the perfect workplace, the most perfect ethical workplace, what exactly does that look like?
Well, first of all, it's top down. You have to set an example from the top. And a good example is, we mentioned Enron a few minutes ago, is Enron had a really corrupt leadership. In fact, the president, the CEO, the chief financial officer have all been convicted of federal fraud. And so I can say that with comfort that these people, engaged in extensive corruption. But what happened down the ladder is when the mid-level managers and others saw that the whole operation was corrupt, a lot of them said, well, if they're going to be corrupt, we can be corrupt and we can be even more corrupt. And so it fed into a very bad cycle. So number one is that you've got to have an ethical creed from the very top. And a good example of this was a major pharmaceutical company had really worked very hard on some major ethical challenges and problems that had occurred in their workplace. And then shortly after that, they found out that some of their senior vice presidents, some really important people in the company, were skimming on their expense accounts, were listing things on their expense accounts that they had not incurred or not incurred in pursuit of the business. And the president of the company was so incensed that he fired those other senior managers and said, we have spent so much money to get past our challenges and things. How can you not set a good example and follow the trail? So I think it's important that companies act ethically across the board. And there's a professor at Darden, Ed Freeman, and he came out with an approach to ethical analysis called stakeholder analysis. And that's basically where you treat everybody well, whether they're employees, vendors, customers, members of the community around you. And I endorse that approach. I endorse an approach where you look at your stakeholders and you make sure they're all being treated well.
And so if there's a leader out there who's listening to this particular episode and they feel like their culture is less than ethical or it's not the desired culture that they would like to make sure that they have a functioning team, where should they start?
Okay. One of the things I do tell my students, and I have seniors and then MBA candidates mostly in my classes, is that a lot of people finish school and they're in debt and they've been living poor and they've been driving a 20-year-old car and all that, living in an apartment. And as soon as they get out and they get that first big job, they, get the new car. My joke is they get the 2.5 children and the dog and, so forth. But what happens is they become a prisoner of the system. So they may see unethical conduct, but they're so financially bound that they can't just say to the company, take this job and shove it. So I actually encourage new professionals, young professionals, to be very, very careful in their what they do early on and not incur a lot of debt when they first get out of school and kind of evaluate the waterfront. And one example that I do use is a personal friend of mine who is a very high-level international consultant. When he got his MBA at the University of Chicago, which is a very prestigious operation, he actually ended up at Enron in the mid-90s. And
Oh, wow.
he got there and he realized that even in the mid-90s, it was a corrupt operation. And it took him 6 months to get out of there. because he just couldn't quit because he had so much overhead from pursuing his MBA. And so, fortunately, he did get another job, but it took him 6 months, and he said it was a very long 6 months. So I think, first of all, is to be aware of your surroundings. Try to work for companies that have a hard line ethical approach, and I think that's number one. And as a leader, like I said, I think it's really important to set a good example yourself and to emphasize across the board how you approach things. And of course, the government gets involved these days with things like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is a very big deal, and things like that, where the government encourages businesses to have good, solid auditing programs so that usually you can, if there's a problem in a company, you can tell by the numbers.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned government, Dr. Schein. And of course, we are about a month out from the inauguration that just happened for President Trump. And, this past election was a very polarizing election for the country. And so a lot of people have come to distrust government and presidential leadership in the United States. And so you have a book, The Decline of America, 100 Years of Leadership Failures, and it addresses significant issues in leadership, particularly presidential leadership. So in your opinion, what do you think made a great president to lead this unique country of the United States of America, so we don't keep feeling life-jacked ourselves?
Well, it is a really crazy situation in the United States. And if we ran corporations the way we run the government, the entire place would be bankrupt. We'd be a third world country. And it's very unfortunate. And of course, one of the things that Trump ran on with his new buddy, Elon Musk, is government efficiency. And I'm a huge proponent of massive cuts in the federal government, and not for punishing people, but because we need government to be responsive, and it's become flabby and unresponsive to the needs of our citizens. But we have just somehow put together an amazing list of people who are not, as I mentioned earlier, A team, in my opinion. And I got a lot of flack when the book came out. The book did well, but I got a lot of flack because of my grades. In fact, several different people commented and said, Dr. Schein's a really hard grader, because the highest grade in my book is a B- for Harry Truman. And since I'm known as a conservative, sometimes people criticize my book as being, unfair to certain Democrat people. But I gave a D- to George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Obama. I haven't graded Trump because we held up on, the book came out right after Obama left office, and so we stopped the book at that point. But my observation is that we should be selecting candidates in a more scientific approach of people who are exceptional leaders. And somehow it doesn't seem that we've been able to do that. And I think the 2024 election was one of two very flawed candidates in a very flawed system. And so I'm not sure how we can get into a better position where we can pick some better people to even be the candidates on each side. In other words, I want choice. I want the public to get a chance to vote. But this election, more than the 2024 election, more than any in my lifetime, I have heard people say, I am not really that excited about either candidate, but I'm voting for X or Y because I think that's the lesser of two evils. And that really concerns me. So I think, if anything, I think we've gone downhill. And again, I don't, Harry Truman made some grievous mistakes when he was president, but he still came out, in my humble opinion, kind of top of the stack. And a lot of Republicans would have liked to have seen Ronald Reagan with a higher rating. And Ronald Reagan was very popular with the people, but the reality is that they didn't do much to balance the budget and control the growth of government. Although people say, well, here you had 12 years of Republicans, two terms for Reagan, one term for H.W. Bush, and yet we didn't really move the country that far forward. But there was a pretty positive environment during Reagan. That's a good thing. I'm not knocking positive environment, but I would have liked to have seen government not get bloated out of control. And that's the part that a lot of people will overlook, is that Reagan had a very good relationship with Tip O'Neill. He was dealing with a Democrat-controlled House. And Tip O'Neill basically got everything he wanted while Reagan was president. It's like, no, you guys together didn't really help the United States get on a more firm footing. So that, not to be too political, but again, I'd like to see some stronger candidates who have hardcore business backgrounds and, can do things that would make the country run better. We have got to fix so many problems quickly. The national debt is scary. Social Security runs out of money in 2030. Medicare may run out of money first. We have got to get better leadership, and maybe this administration will do that. I've got my fingers crossed.
Well, I have to ask you, for these last two presidents, for Trump and Biden, what grade do you think you would give each of them?
Remembering I'm a conservative, so this is always considered. I would give Trump a D for his first term, and I am awarding an F to the Biden administration. I consider it the worst performance of a president in 110 years, going back to Wilson, which was the beginning, that the American leadership period began with the end of World War I. That's why I started my book with Wilson. And I think that this is a failed administration. Now, people will quickly say, well, it's not completely fair because Biden obviously is suffering, from dementia during most of his term. And of course, that was hidden by his spouse and the people around him. But my opinion is that Biden's selection of the people he surrounded himself with and what happened during his 4 years in office, it clearly was a failure, and again, as a professor, I award him an F grade. The only other F grade in this time period is Richard Nixon, who obviously resigned in disgrace. But oddly enough, Richard Nixon's F grade is interesting because he resigned in disgrace, but he actually accomplished more in his administration than some other people did. So it's a tough deal putting in grades on this. But yeah, I would give Trump a D. And remember, he did not get reelected after his first term. That's certainly not a big endorsement. And then, Biden, like I said, I know there's some people out there defending Biden, but I don't think it's defensible.
No, understandable. Now, you also emphasize the role of discipline in building resilience. So can you share some practical strategies that the listeners can implement to develop discipline? Because I know it's very difficult to have discipline, especially when there are a lot of distractions out here. So how do you develop discipline to build resilience?
Oh, gosh. That's probably the hardest question I get asked. And I am renowned as a very disciplined person. It takes a lot of discipline to complete 4 degrees. I can tell you that a real low point for me was I had been at UPenn for 4 years, a very heavy-duty competitive MBA for 2 years, and then I went to law school directly from the MBA program. And about the middle of my second year of law school, I said, I am really hating this. This is really, I need to get out and work a full-time job, and I'm just really burned out. And it was very difficult for me to finish school, but I finished it because I had started it. And I think that's an important concept is that sometimes it's part of that discipline is to you just finish things because you started them. And it's interesting because you study, dropout rates in college and dropout rates. We don't worry so much about high school anymore, but there's still dropout rates in high school, but certainly at the college level and in the graduate ranks. And you've got to make a commitment to the future. And for me, the future was I wanted to have an MBA and a law degree, and I wanted to be a captain of industry. And I tried, work for 2 Fortune 50 companies and saw what I saw and said, yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to go do my own thing. And that's kind of how I did my own thing for the next 25, 40 years. But you have to have that commitment to the future and pay your dues. I get a lot of credit for doing something that is completely personal to me. So I'm not holding this out like I'm a great person. I committed to working out. And my friends know me as somebody who religiously works out. And what I tell people is I have an appointment with myself. And what happens is that some people work out after work. I go to a lot of, first of all, I teach in the evening, but I also go to a lot of networking meetings and things like that. So what I do is I set the alarm, and including this morning, and got up early and went over to the gym, and I have a defined workout at the gym and did that and came home and restarted the rest of my day. But by doing it first thing in the morning, that's what works for me. For some people, it works better to do it after work. But I work out 3 mornings a week at the gym, and I do a little yoga workout on the days I don't go to the gym. But I mean, I'm absolutely on track. And even if I get up and I feel lousy, it's like, you know what? My body will appreciate that. And I frankly did have a harder workout this morning than I did Friday morning. It's just the nature of the beast. But you've got to commit to whatever it is that you want to accomplish. And that, to me, is sometimes there's the famous fable of the tortoise and the hare. And sometimes it's better to be that hardworking tortoise who just keeps on going. And it's not the speed with which you get there. It's the fact that you put your head down and you kept going.
No, most definitely. I can't agree with you more. So, speaking of your own journey and reflecting upon it, and especially reflecting upon the support that you received over the years, how important do you feel that having a support system is in overcoming adversity?
It's really important. It's absolutely critical, and nobody does anything by themselves. And I'm rather critical of the Obama speech where he says, you didn't get that business where you were by yourself. And I think that was a very callous and silly statement. But the reality is that even though I tend to be a solo person, a solopreneur, I think is the term sometimes used, I still have a team. And your team in life starts with your parents. And one of the things that has carried me through my whole life is my parents gave me a great start. And one of the things that I think is encouraging right now, and it's been a controversy over the last few years, as you know, is parents showing up at school board meetings saying, this is what we want in our classrooms. And that's extremely important because I think parents backed away. We've got mostly 2-parent working families today. We've got a lot of solo parents. I was a solo dad for a long time, raised my 2 sons. And you've got to be invested in your kids' education. And I think that helps to get discipline started. No, you will sit here and do your homework from, 5 to 6, and then we're going to eat dinner at 6 o'clock or something like that. And the people that have that discipline and have that inspiration from their parents, that's the first step, in my opinion.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. So, in your opinion, what is the best way to build resilience?
Doing it, just doing it over and over and over again. And, like I said, I go to the gym regularly. I can't conceptualize my life at this point without going to the gym. I was not a gym regular, but I was a runner first. And then I discovered that for some of us, running is not the best thing for things called hips and knees. so, they after I'd torn up both hips, they said, "Yeah, probably not a good idea to keep running." So that's what turned me into a gym rat. And you have to have objectives, and so I think part of resilience is to say, these are my objectives. Like I said, my early life objective was to become a medical doctor. When I realized that was not a good fit for me personally, I refocused myself on something else. And I did have a period of, gee, what do I really want to be? And sometimes factors, come in. But one of the things that happened to me is I had some terrific teachers in high school. And I started in Catholic school. I was K through 8 in Catholic school. The nuns are very committed to their students. And that guidance from the nuns, supported by solid parenting, was very powerful in terms of getting me on the right track. I still can't, my penmanship is still horrendous, but the nuns did their best to help me write good penmanship. But then in high school, I had some super teachers. And then when I got to Penn, it was more of a mixed bag, but I had some excellent teachers. But as I mentioned, I started my own business, and I was very blessed to work with two very, very different people work with me during most of the time I had the small business in Philadelphia. And they were very, very different people. And yet in their own special way, they contributed a great deal to me. And that's why I mentioned is through life, you will have that team feeling, even if you don't have official teams. So today, I'm really kind of a solopreneur, but I have the support of some of my fellow faculty at my university, and I have a big networking operation where I go to a lot of businesses. I'm active with the Greater Heights Chamber of Commerce. I've been in the Heights for 27 years, and it's very inspiring to feel accepted, and people know who you are and they talk to you and they're very supportive. And that's, I think, very important, to be connected with your community, and to not everybody's going to be your quick buddy, but sometimes just having the right connections makes a lot of difference. And that's the part of what I think works for people, is building that team.
And so what's next for you, Dr. Schein?
Well, so I've got 3 courses. It's an 8-week course on health care law and ethics. And I'm very excited about teaching it. It'll be my second time teaching that course. And I'm getting my 2 other syllabi ready to roll on. I will be teaching two classes in the classroom. What I want to do is finish the book that you and I talked a little bit about, is A Cheap Education, which is bluntly my 4 years at the University of Pennsylvania. It's a play on words. It's UPenn is today, and it was then, one of the most expensive universities in the country. I got a better education on the streets of Philadelphia than I did in the classroom.
Oh,
So I think people are going to find that interesting. So the title of the book is A Play on Words, and I'm pretty far behind. I was kind of ticking along, and I got through 14 chapters, and then I had I taught 11 courses last school year against a normal course load of like 3 and 3. And so it was just too much to keep going, but I'm hoping to return to it.
well, thank you, Dr. Schein, for sharing your incredible journey and valuable insights on resilience, leadership, and ethics in the workplace, and also giving us, your take on leadership, presidential leadership in the United States. Your story is a powerful reminder that with discipline, focus, and a strong support system, we can overcome obstacles and achieve our goals. So how can listeners find and connect with you or read any of your work or purchase a copy of any of your books?
I'm on Amazon, and I'm active on all of the major social media sites, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter. And so I'm pretty easy to find.
Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
If you feel misguided or that you don't see a good path forward, talk to some people, talk with your parents, talk with your teachers, talk with your boss, but don't just wander around and say, gosh, I really don't know where I want to go. If you need help focusing, seek that help, because you don't want to look back 25 or 30 years later and say, gee, I could have accomplished so much if I'd finished college, or I finished graduate school, or I did this or that or the other thing. So I encourage people to set goals and pursue them.
Well, Dr. Schein, I appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to seeing how you continue to inspire others in their journey. Thank you so much for being a guest on Life Jacks, the Resilience Podcast. I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Please take care.
Thank you so much, and I wish the same for you and yours.
Dr. David Schein, everyone. Be sure to join me next time for more uplifting stories and insights on resilience. Until then, keep pushing forward, embrace the journey, and remember that every setback can lead to a greater comeback. Dr. Rowe, signing off.